despite navigating some of the technical difficulties.
Sorry for my tardiness.
No need to apologize. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, Darren, we're so excited to have you here. For those that you don't know, Darren is the Director and Chief Experience Officer at Kaizen UX Consulting and Education. He's extremely passionate about all things UX. He holds 20 plus years in experience in human-computer interaction and interaction design. And within the last 16 plus years, he's been working full-time in the world of UX and customer experience. And his professional footprint spans several organizations, including Fortune 50. He currently serves as a senior learning experience designer for Michigan State University. Michigan's my home state, so I go Michigan. And as an adjunct professor for Kent University's UX Design Master's Program, which is based out of Kent, Ohio. As an adjunct at Lawrence Technological University in Southfield, Michigan. He leads UX workshops at Grand Circus in Detroit, Michigan. And he's also the host of the World of UX podcast, which I definitely recommend that you tune into, and I'll post a link in the chat. And he's currently pursuing a PhD in educational leadership from North Central University. Everyone, please welcome Darren, and I'll go ahead and turn off my camera and audio. And we'll do a Q&A after Darren's session. So as he's talking, if you have questions, go ahead, leave that in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll cover that up. But for now, let's get started.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. Let's get things situated here. And let me know if you can see my screen. Or are we having any snags? Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, we can see your screen, but you might want to go full screen in your presentation.
Oh, definitely. Definitely will.
Okay, how's it? Yeah, perfect.
Good. Okay.
You're so good to go.
All right, finally. Okay, here I go. And it's a lightning talk, so I'm going to be moving relatively quickly through each of these. Thank you for all those of you who are joining us on tonight. Thank you for your patience with me as I got through some of the issues. We could actually do a UX evaluation on Hopin after some of the things we've seen here. But let's cut straight to the chase. My topic tonight is overcoming the mirage of UX ambiguity. Mirage. Take special note of Mirage. So here we go. Ready for a lightning talk? Let's dive in. So we're going to start off with a scenario. That work? Scenario. So in this scenario, Ratul, he recently landed a position as a project manager for a really promising software company. And after he landed the position, he learned that the company was launching a strategy to become more user-centered in their design efforts. Pretty common, right? He'd been engaging with people on LinkedIn, trying to get up to speed about UX, attending a lot of meetups. He wanted to broaden his understanding of the discipline as a whole. He didn't know much about it. I mean, he's a project manager, right? But it's still good for everybody to know a little bit about UX. Much to his surprise, he's encountering quite a few issues in trying to expand his horizons a bit. And so we're going to join him on his journey a little bit here because everything that he's encountered thus far has just pretty much just left him confused and frustrated. So let's look at his latest encounter. Ratul went to a meetup and he met 9 people. Actually ended up in a conversation with 9 people. Now, I mentioned the titles here because it's key to the story. And this is very real world. This kind of stuff happens on a regular basis. There's no hyperbole with this. This is a regular occurrence. Titles: UX designer, product designer, UX UI designer, UX developer, UX researcher, UX specialist, UI designer, service designer, and UX visual designer. We all know how confusing titles can be. Imagine if you're trying to wrap your mind around UX and you are of the belief that titles are going to give you clarity. And we have to think again. He noticed that most of these people spent time in the session talking about design tools. And then there was one person that seemed to be more infatuated with colors. All they talked about was colors. They never really talked about what UX really was or what Ratul thought UX was. They're just talking about seemingly everything else. There was one person that appeared to be more grounded and experienced, however, in the midst of this group. But interestingly, other people were visually upset, noticeably upset about anything that that person had to say. It didn't matter what was being covered. Now, one of the people, another one, who came across as very passionate, emphasis on passionate, they talked about the importance of design thinking, and they expressed excitement about the how might we mindset, that particular brainstorming aspect. Now, he's not an expert by any means when it comes to UX, but he even knew that the things these people were talking about, they had him scratching his head, and he was already confused. And now he's hearing people say things that he knows are not accurate. So you can imagine how that impacts him. Ratul also recently heard a talk by Don Norman, where Don Norman expressed concern about design thinking. He literally said, and this is a fact, Don Norman said, by itself, design thinking is worthless. So Ratul had that on his mind. So based on that, hearing what was said, he's even further conflicted. So he's come to these sessions on multiple occasions trying to get clarity, and he just keeps going deeper into the rabbit hole, if you will. Ratul was very casual at this event. He left the conversation more confused than when it started. He thought that UX titles would help him to gain clarity about roles. He did everything but that. He expected to be better equipped. This was his goal. He wanted to be able to speak intelligently about UX-related matters with non-UX peers at work. They were collaborating. They wanted to understand UX. They wanted to be able to have a sense of intelligence and confidence about it. But these efforts were not helping at all. He thought hearing people talk about how they worked would provide clarity, but these people just confused him. He thought he'd be able to improve his level of communication with other UX professionals, and he was still left at a loss. He thought he'd be empowered to engage effectively with his own UX team at the company, but instead he felt challenged, he felt clueless, and he felt powerless. That's a really bad state to be in. He had no confidence whatsoever, and he felt more likely to avoid certain discussions instead of being willing to just dive in and engage. His road to confusion came full circle. After all the interactions he endured, he drew the conclusion that the world of UX was unclear. This is where he, and not only he, but a lot of other people, they go down the same path. Things were unclear. He felt that UX was without direction. He felt that the lack of agreement among UX professionals was a sign that something was really amiss, and it was a key sign of the status of what was going on with UX. And so he was also reluctant to delve into the topic anymore. He had already spent a lot of effort, time, trying to gain more of an understanding. He was willing initially, but because of all the experiences that he had, he threw up his hands. He was pretty much done. And he decided to hold fast to the conclusions that he drew. So now not only is he confused, but he's a person that's going to be really difficult for somebody to reach. We've probably all met people like that. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in the same state as Ratul? Have you ever found yourself, wherever you were in your UX journey, or do you know somebody who's confused, trying to understand, can't get an understanding? Somebody who thinks that things are confusing, that they think that there are no standards, that UX is anybody can do it, it really doesn't take anything. All these different types of mindsets that we run into regularly. Have you been there? Have you seen it? We all have, right? Well, how in the world do we get there? How in the world do things like that happen? Well, it turns out that when we're trying to learn, we're like these baby birds, and I call it baby bird syndrome, where when you want to learn, when you're curious, we're actually in a gullible state. We don't realize it, but we're very, very vulnerable. And we pretty much, like these baby birds, you close your eyes, you open your mouths, and you expect somebody to deposit something, and you expect what's deposited to be trustworthy, you expect it to be reliable. But if somebody deposits something, such as those 9 people in the scenario with Ratul are depositing things that are not viable, some of which he could recognize, some of which he could not, vulnerability plus misinformation equals ambiguity. That's how ambiguity comes into play. Now, somebody might say, what is ambiguity? Well, basically, this is the doubtfulness or uncertainty of meaning or intention. So people are not clear. Excuse me. They don't know what's going on. They really don't know what to think of it. And when people can't really understand UX, they're going to have a very difficult time ascribing value to it. Have you been there before, where you're trying to get UX work done, but you're having trouble connecting with teams, and when you really get into the weeds and examine it, you find out it's because a lot of people really don't understand UX, or they have a misunderstanding of UX, and so they become cynical. And it's very difficult to communicate and collaborate with somebody when they're cynical regarding your discipline, regarding my discipline. Very tough. We still got to climb that mountain, but it's tough. What would you say if I told you that that ambiguity is actually a mirage? It's not really legit at all. I'm not saying that Ratul is not confused. I'm not saying that he was not in a state of ambiguity himself. In a sense, yes, he was. But it's a mirage. And it's a mirage that is easily dispelled if we go down a certain path. And a lot of people are in this state today, but they don't have to be there. If you're there, you don't have to stay there. But we will acknowledge if somebody feels that way, that's their reality. And we'll never get anywhere when we don't pay attention to someone's reality, what they're seeing as real, even though it's really a mirage. We really need to deal with it in a constructive and in an empathetic manner. So the question is, thinking about the types of things that are on people's minds with regard to UX, what are some of the common topics, mindsets, the questions that come up? Here are 7 things. What are UX's standards? What are the modes of operation? What are the things that UX people will definitely do to accomplish the task at hand? What are our value proposals? What do we bring to the table? What's in it for them to engage with the UX team, to trust in UX, to rely upon UX? And these are some of the things we have to get through if we're trying to get through that ambiguity that people are experiencing. Again, it's a mirage, but to them it's real. So if you just tell them it's not real and that's your response, you're going to have an even more difficult time. So we need these things. What are our processes? We need to make sure that we're communicating what our processes are. Appropriate. We don't want to start talking about all of our buzzwords and things like that. There's a time to talk about it, but it's only when we're trying to help people to understand what it is we're doing, and only certain clients and stakeholders. Because if you spend too much time telling them how we work, we think they're going to understand, but the truth is they don't understand any of those terms. So, but folks, some of them still need to understand that we've got a lot of processes we deal with. Same can be said for methods, methodologies. Yes, there is a difference between the two, and principles. So all of these things are associated with UX. It's not just making things pretty. That's for the UX UI crowd. There's actually no such thing as UX UI. That's another reason that there's so much ambiguity or seeming ambiguity is taking place, because people think that UX is UI or vice versa, or they think that we're just about making things pretty when we don't deal with the presentation layer at all, truth be told. So, but we're going to get there in a moment. So how do we overcome, in total, how do we overcome this mirage of UX ambiguity? It's as real as the person that's perceiving it, even though it's not there. But if you follow these things that I'm about to show you, if you can help people get to these points, they will overcome it. That mirage will be gone, and you can start making more progress and making progress faster. So basically, we overcome with facts. Pretty simple, isn't it? It's funny how that really simple things can be used to dispel or diffuse the issues that we're dealing with. Facts. It's all about facts. When people, the 9 people in Ratul's scenario, If they were aware of the facts, that conversation would have gone differently. Ratul would have gained what he was after in that setting. He would have come away enriched. He would have come away empowered, and he would have been ready to do what he intended on doing, having gone there in the first place. And he'd be able to go back, talk to people at work, communicate, collaborate, everything gets done. It's all about the facts. Interestingly, the facts they're fleeting because we're surrounded by misinformation in today's world of UX. We're overrun with it, actually. So one of the things you need to do if you want to get the facts, you need to make sure you're connected to reliable and experienced UX professionals. If you're connected to people who don't really know what's going on, there's going to be an issue. So again, you've got to be connected to reliable and experienced UX professionals, not folks from the fake it till you make it crowd. And yes, there is a group of people in the world of UX, and they will tell you that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to fake it until I make it. Well, when you're in that state, that's not a state of confidence. That's not a state of reliability. That's not a state of trustworthiness. You're just in shark-infested waters, hoping you can get out. And the person who has the ability to get you out is just standing there staring at you, when both of you, if you had facts, you wouldn't even be in this situation to start with. So we don't want to rely on the fake it till you make it crowd, because all they can do is get you further into deep water with regard to the situation at hand. So that said, I want to present myself in a moment as an example. There's a lot of other people just like me, so I'm just using this as an example, because you've got to find reliable people. There are people who say they've been in UX for 3 months and they say they're a mentor. You can't mentor after 3 months. So for me, as was said, as Diane presented, I've been working in UX, what we now know as UX, because when I started, we didn't call it that, but I've been working in this arena for over 20 years. Here's a quick screenshot of my professional footprint. So these are companies that I have worked for, have done work for, have completed projects for, have led projects for. This is not an all-inclusive list, but this list and others that are not here represent millions of dollars of revenue, millions of dollars of brand goodwill, things that where we've put ourselves to work with regard to UX and we've been successful. So that means that we have some insight. I looked for people like me when I was coming along. Other people that are coming along need to find people like me, and other people that are on the track as well. Those people bring value to this arena. It's not just the 20-year folks. There are some other people who have something to contribute, but if they don't have the facts, then there's a problem, and I don't want to see anybody here in shark-infested water. I just want to take a moment as we begin to wrap up. I want to show you this illustration. I delivered a talk when I was a UX manager for Bosch, and the talk was called "What is UX?" And I actually put the first version of this together. I call this the landscape of UX. It's also affectionately known as, it illustrates the 4 pillars of UX: heuristics and usability, information architecture, UX research, and interface and interaction design. Good old UI is actually a subset of UX, but it's not UX UI. And so I found over the course of my career, in observing, in learning from people, in taking classes, in educating myself, in building my acumen, I learned that this is UX. When somebody says UX, it's all of this. It's not one little thing. It's all of these things. So this is where the facts reside. So if you want to overcome what seems like ambiguity, and I know it feels like that, I know it does. The more we learn about heuristics and usability, the more we learn about information architecture, the more we learn about UX research and the different types, and these are subsets. All the things you see around that are subsets of each, and interface and interaction design. The more skilled you become, the more knowledgeable you become, the more you build your acumen in these areas, the more you can diffuse away with the ambiguity, the more you can be confident, the more you can be solid, and the more you can impact others for their good. So, closing notes. Remember, the ambiguity associated with UX It's really a mirage. Don't fall for it. I know sometimes it feels that way, but if you find out the facts, if you're confused about something and find out the facts, you'll overcome pretty quickly. Clarity is achieved by embracing the facts associated with the tenets of the discipline, the tenets that I just showed you. Make sure to tap into and connect with viable and trustworthy knowledge resources, not just anybody and not people who say they are. Make sure you validate them. It's okay to evaluate somebody. If you were going to the dentist, you'd want to get somebody viable. If you were getting your car repaired, you'd want somebody viable. If you were going in for surgery, you want somebody reliable. If you want to learn about UX, you want somebody reliable and not somebody who's just touting themselves. That's not going to get the job done. The more you embrace the tenets, the clearer things will be. The clearer things are, the collaborative efforts will be. As your collaborative efforts are, the more value you bring, and the more value you bring, the happier you and everybody else will be. So that's it for my lightning talk today, getting through this. If you like to, this is where you can find me. If you'd like to hear even this topic covered in more detail, I actually talked about this over the course of about 6 or 7 weeks on my podcast. And that's my World of UX podcast cover that you see in the upper left. But I've got a Facebook page. I'm on Twitter. I've got a YouTube channel that's in the process of rolling out. Excuse me. We actually rolled out a new UX social media resource today called Engage. If you're interested in learning more about that, let me know. It literally just rolled out today. So if you want to get into conversations about UX, reliable conversations with people who are knowledgeable and are truly passionate, let me know. We'll send you a link. We'll invite you in, and you can have conversations and not be subject to the weird algorithms on LinkedIn or misinformation or things like that. We want to make sure people have a viable place to go to talk about the discipline. So that is it. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Darren, so much for that wonderful presentation. I know that there was a lot that personally resonated with me. So we're going to go ahead and take a few minutes for Q&A. You can go ahead and leave your questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature under the session tab. And while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, first, Rachel did have a question about the graphic that you shared. Rachel, I don't know if you want to add more. I think it was like that, like UX graphic toward the end of the presentation.
Yeah, the landscape of UX. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if somebody wants a copy of it,
great, yes.
I share it all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And to everyone here, we will be sharing presentations and recordings after the conference ends. So if you can't get a specific copy to that should be in Darren's presentation where you'll have access to it. I'll start with one of the questions. What/who are some of your most trusted resources?
Oh, let's see. Trusted resources. Well, I got to start off by talking about Delta CX. Some of you might be familiar with the fact I frequently appear on Debbie Levitt's show. Matter of fact, Debbie Levitt, Dr. Nick Fine, and I come on. They started calling us the Three Musketeers. We do an Ask Me Anything show. I think it's the second Tuesday every month for 2 hours. People just ask questions and we just fire away. We have an absolute ball on that show, and anybody who wants to tap in and to learn, that's a great place. And Debbie has an absolute wealth. She has shows every day, literally. Every day. So if you go to YouTube and look up Delta CX, you can find the Delta CX channel. She is standing for the integrity of the discipline. She's excited to help people. She even does free portfolio reviews for people. I think there's a time limit on it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Zach said, yeah, the Mary Poppins of yeah, thanks, Zach. Yeah. She's referred to as the Mary Poppins of CX and UX. Yeah, she's really good. She's really knowledgeable and she really cares. And you don't find a lot of people that demonstrate a lot of heart in the discipline. So that's one. I love that UX magazine, uxmag.com is the URL. And they're starting to ramp up their efforts. They seem to have been going quiet for a while, but they have for years have been a fantastic resource for just sharing different capsulized thoughts. It's really what you're going to get when you look at posts on the internet. So a lot of good information there. I love uxmatters.com. They've been a great resource for years. Again, that's uxmatters.com. Every once in a while, I may have seen something on somebody said, what is Debbie's last name? It's Levitt. L-E. They got to put a G in there on the transcript. So UX Matters is a fantastic resource. Beyond that, I'm starting to put together a recommended podcast list. I'm not done with that yet, so I don't have anything else to share on that at the moment. But I do have a few book lists. Books are huge. You can find good book. Emphasis. I can't emphasize that enough because the quality of books has declined tremendously over the last decade, to the extent that you're hard pressed to really find books that are trustworthy. And the funny thing is, good UX material has a very long shelf life. So when you see a book like Jacob Nielsen wrote a book in the early 2000s called Homepage Usability. I don't know if anybody is familiar with it. That book changed my life. It changed my career. And it really helped me to dive into heuristics and make heuristics my number one tool that I take out of my toolbox when I'm doing UX work, whether it's to inform design or to evaluate design. So, but at any rate, I've got 3 book lists. I've got them on Medium. If you go to uxuncensored.medium.com, you will find 3 different book lists. And one of them is all encompassing. It talks about UX as a whole, then with a few addendum books on the end. There's another list for emotional intelligence, and that is really key. A lot of people are learning UX, but they're not learning about the importance of emotional intelligence. And it actually, if you're not emotionally intelligent, it's going to limit your ability to progress in the discipline. You're not going to be able to build relationships. You're going to get upset about things when all your research is thrown out the window. So you gotta have your head on straight, because sometimes UX make you want to pull your hair out. But emotional intelligence is key. I also have a list on information architecture, and there is a cognitive psychology list. So I highly recommend. I know it's me, but I'm still going to say I put a lot of work into it. And at my PhD side of me, and for those of you that don't know, part of being a PhD is that they rigorously train us to identify what is trustworthy and what is not. So when I said I put together this list, it's gone through all of those filters to make sure that it's a reliable list. There are a lot of book lists out there I absolutely would not recommend, especially in this day and time. That said, we do have coming out it's already available on O'Reilly, and it's available for pre-sale now on Amazon. There's a book called 97 Things that Every Designer Should Know, something like that. I get the title wrong. I actually am one of the 97 people that wrote for that book. So there's a lot of tips that are going to be in that book. But there's a lot of books. I won't pull out my normal soapbox here tonight, but there's a lot of books that will really get you in trouble. And we don't want to see people go down that road. You can tell I'm passionate. Diane talked about it. You probably hear it in my voice. I really care about people. I care about people succeeding. My heart sometimes is too big. My wife is on the call. She'll tell you my heart's too big. And I really want to, people take it the wrong way sometimes, but I just want to see people succeed. And it cuts me to my heart when I see people not succeeding. So that's where my heart is concerning such things. So we labor about these things because we want to give that much. and we want to see you grow. I want to hear about you getting that new job. I want to hear about you and the growth that you had in the discipline. I want to hear about your educational success. I want to hear that you got your education from the right places. So that's another topic, but I just want to see people successful.
We love your passion, Darren, and I shared a few of those resources that you mentioned in the chat, so people can take a look at the NM Group article that you mentioned, your Medium posts, and I put in the book that you mentioned on Amazon too, 97 Things Every UX Designer Should Know. We have another question. So someone wants to know, do you have any advice on how to improve UX ambiguity in a large organization where there are lots of room for misalignment?
Yes, it's actually one of my favorite topics. It's funny you mention that. In my last few jobs, I have been responsible not only for doing the daily UX work, but one of the things I've been responsible for is managing the UX maturity levels. If you go out to SlideShare, you'll find a presentation. You don't have the recording, but the presentation from a talk I did on UX maturity levels in you is what it's called. And you'll see a lot of information there. I plan on actually re-recording it soon and putting it on the UX Uncensored channel. So pulling for that. And I did do some episodes on UX maturity levels on my podcast as well. So you can tap into that. But I found a few things that are key. When you realize that you're fighting an uphill battle, it's important to be aware of the UX maturity level so you can see where that company is in its current state, because it might not be fun to see it. It might not feel good to identify it, but it's going to help you so that your expectations are solid, and it helps you to plan and to strategize so that you can help drive that maturity. Some of the things you can do is empower the people. Empower the people by starting a UX newsletter. When you have successes with different projects at the company, document case studies, start a UX intranet, post the case studies and different articles, different things like that to the intranet site, so that you need to have all of these things together, they make for a push and a pull strategy. So you're pushing information out, hoping that people tap into it. And then by having this information there where people can randomly or as they choose to, they can just go in and on demand tap into these resources. Now you've got that pull component. Between that push and that pull, and also constantly sharing your not just with the case studies, but sharing the successes, sharing things that you've helped. Just get into the stories, talk to people in leadership. And when you do these things, you make UX more visible. The value becomes tangible, because actually, and Larry Marine said this, and I love what Larry said. He's one of those under the radar folks that folks don't know about. You'll see him on Debbie's show a lot. But Larry constantly said, and I've always said this as well, UX is actually invisible, which is why it's funny that people ask us for portfolios when we're coming to apply for a job, because real UX is hard to actually see. A lot of what we do, that illustration I just showed you, when you see those things in action, you don't always necessarily see them. So you can't always touch them. So when you start showing people what you've accomplished and making it easy for people to partake of it in their language, not ours, in their language, do what I call speaking exec. When you speak their language and you share your accomplishments and your value in their language, now you start to go up the ladder. Now you'd be like, when I was at Bosch, we got to the point where the engineers wouldn't dream of going into a project without me. And if they had a meeting and I wasn't there because somebody forgot to invite me, they would stop the meeting and say, "Where's Darren?" Engineers, some of you know what it is to work with engineers. The engineers wanted me at the table, but it's because of all the things I just mentioned. Those were things that I implemented at Bosch, and they said that we had the best run UX division in the entire country, or the entire company. I'm sorry, 385,000 employees at the time, and they said that automotive aftermarket had the best run UX division in the company. And I think it was partially because of those things that I just mentioned. And they work no matter what company you're at. You might have some hoops to jump through to do it. Because I've tried to implement an intranet in multiple companies. You can't always do it, and people will fight against you, but do what you can and be patient, because it'll take a while to really implement it the right way.
That was really great advice. I know I even took a couple notes on the side while you were talking. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen UX patterns change in the past 10 to 20 years?
Can I ask for clarity on patterns? Because I could go in 3 different directions. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure I answer correctly.
Yeah, feel free to whoever submitted the question to add some clarification around that. But yes, Catherine, I agree in the chat. The information has been very real and actionable, and we all very much appreciate that.
Thank you, Catherine. That's what we need, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need, real and actionable stuff. I'm going to take a shot at answering that question. And is that the answer?
Like onboarding, search, cancellation, some of those patterns.
Okay, patterns like design patterns.
Yes.
Design patterns? Yeah, because when I hear the word patterns, I think of like 6 different things. So I've seen design patterns are becoming more streamlined to a great extent. A lot of companies are starting to implement design libraries, pattern libraries, which is, if you can do it, every company can't. If you can, that is absolutely fantastic. If you can put together, okay, if we're going to do search, this is how we're going to execute search. When I see the word cancellation, I start to think about maybe forms that are used in some part of the user experience. Those things should all be documented, because you don't want to have to redesign. You don't want to rebuild the wheel. I can't remember how that old adage goes, but you folks know what I'm getting at. If something already exists, why start from scratch? So if you know you're going to use certain elements are going to be in your design, and you're going to use them over and over and over again, that's grounds for you to begin putting together a pattern library so that you can simplify the design process. Please know and understand, however, that library will need to be maintained. It will need to be evaluated heuristically. You will need to incorporate benchmarking, which some companies that do have pattern libraries, they don't have any benchmarking efforts. And if you walk into a room and mention benchmarking to 1,000 UX people could be in a room. If you mention benchmarking, maybe a very small percentage will nod their heads in agreement, and everybody else will have the deer in the headlights thing going on. And if you don't know, this one thing, I got to say this too, Diane, if you don't know something, so what? How about that? There is no shame in not knowing. There's shame in not admitting that you don't know. How about that for a different twist on things? We've all been in a position where there was something we didn't know. So when you find out what you don't know, then just go find out. No big deal. So there's no shame in it. It doesn't make you less of a professional. It doesn't make you unreliable. It doesn't make you untrustworthy. Exactly. None of this fake it till you make it stuff. You don't have to fake anything. And the effort you put into faking, because all of us know somebody more than likely that's faking it till you make it. If the effort you put into faking is wasted, because it could be put into getting things done right. So just don't fake it till you make it. Keep learning till you make it. Keep striving till you make it. That's better energy used than faking it. Because if you concentrate on being a fake, you're just going to become a good fake. And that doesn't benefit anybody. So yeah, patterns are great. Absolutely. Patterns are good. If you can't do a pattern library, that won't stop you from approaching all your designs with a pattern, which is something we sort of do whether we acknowledge it or not. If you don't have a pattern library and you're doing the same things all the time, aren't you going to follow the same motif? Aren't you going to follow the same approach? If you look at Luke Wroblewski's best practices for creating forms, it's on point. And he did a ton of research that proves that if you construct forms in this way, people can fill them out faster. I don't need to research that anymore unless I want to benchmark it and validate it going forward. But hey, he already did the work. Just go and he's trusted. with regard to that. So just jump on it and go. Patterns are great. Power to patterns.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Darren. What an amazing and informative and actionable session. I can speak for all of us. I certainly have a lot of takeaways from this personally. Emails to send to coworkers with this. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. And everyone, I posted links in the chat where you can follow Darren, listen to his podcast. Again, highly recommend it. If you enjoyed this session, you're absolutely going to enjoy his podcast. And you can continue the conversation in the Slack channel. If you search for the session talk, you can find that and converse with attendees who have been in this talk. But once again, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you for having me. And I'm trying to find the link so people can get into the, you know what? We're another snafu for me. I didn't bookmark it. We just set it up today. I didn't bookmark it, but anybody, if you get in touch with me, a matter of fact, if you go into LinkedIn and if you go to my page and look at my activity for today, you'll see the link. It's in there. It's called Engage. And a lot of people have been connecting all day. I love being able to talk about UX and not have to deal with the riffraff, frankly. And there's a lot of riffraff, and I'm allergic to riffraff, to get my drift.
I'll put your LinkedIn in the chat as well, and everybody can go
Awesome.
and find that post that you mentioned, and I'll also put that in the Slack channel.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you all so much. So while Darren is all set and is leaving us, don't forget to check out other sessions. We have some more sessions starting at 8. There's also expo booths that are live now where you can see some of the Code for San Jose local projects and network with other attendees in the networking tab or in the networking group sessions. Thank you everyone so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.